I have been invited to come and give a speech, but I am speechless. I want to thank you for your warm welcome. It is so wonderful to be among friends. President Sally, Chairman Clark, members of the board, scholars, donors, thank you so much for this recognition. I am humbled, I am privileged to be awarded this way, to be recognized in this way, to be mentioned in one breath with Sir Anthony Fisher. I said to some of you this afternoon, when I Googled him, one of the things I noticed was, goodness, we think we know, but we are ever ignorant. Is that a line that is familiar? Hayek told us we always think we know, but we don't. I should have known someone like Sir Anthony Fisher, but I didn't know him. And as I continued to find what I could about him before I came here, what I took away was that here was an individual in the middle of an assault, real assault on freedom, on civilization, that could have really been the end of civilization as we know it. He was one of those few who put himself out there and fought. And when he came back from the war and won that victory, in times of peace, understood that freedom, that liberty is threatened by complacence and by lying back, by taking for granted what you have. He understood, as did Friedrich Hayek and so many of the people that this institute was established by and for which it was established, that if you take refuge in comfort and complacency, and you have no higher ideal, if you do not understand why freedom matters to the individual, to society, to civilization as a whole, then all is lost. And you don't only have to understand that it matters, you also have to fight for it. And that to maintain freedom, as we understand it in this group, it is not only about understanding it, recognizing it, and teaching about it, but it's a constant struggle by the few. Stephen Hayward, who's my friend and a colleague from the American Enterprise Institute, introduced me with the words of courage. And I'm always described as a person who's courageous. But I think that true courage lies with people like a Sir Anthony Fisher, people like a Hayek, who take their time and their resources when they don't need to. They take their intellectual capacity to explain to us over and over again that the freedoms that we take for granted must not be taken for granted, that they will always be challenged and assaulted. I don't know if you read Infidel. I don't know how much of my life story you know. Thank you. But for those of you who don't, I was asked to share with you a little bit of my background. And my background could not be more different from Stephen's or Sally's or Clark's, or for that matter, Sir Anthony's or Hayek, Friedman, all these guys and girls we admire, Margaret Thatcher. These are the people in the West, and as recent as the 20th century, that I thought these are giants of our time. My childhood could not be more different. I was born in Mogadishu, Somalia in 1990. Sorry, I wish that were true. In 1969. I was born in 1969. I am going to be 46 years old next month. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, really, an old woman. And I have prepared remarks, but for me to convey these prepared remarks, I'd have to put these guys on. And I think part of me is too vain and thinks, well, number one, I don't know if you would really enjoy someone going like this. But number two, I think my youth could not be more different. And growing up as a little girl, as a teenager, young woman, the constraints to my personal freedom came from three different sources. The first one was clan and the ethics of custom. When my grandmother, at the age of 5 for me, decides to cut my genitals and sew me up, and when I tell this story to my Western audiences, they're always shocked, absolutely always shocked, appalled, and disgusted. But what they don't understand is that that was common practice. And there is so much activism against that sort of practice, child marriages, forced marriages, the treatment of women according to clan and tribal and customary laws. But what I understood as a child is where my grandmother was coming from. Because in that context, my grandmother's reasoning was, if you want to survive, you have to have a husband who has to protect you. And you're never going to get a husband if your genitals are not sewn shut. It is sort of the seal that proves to him that you haven't been with anyone else, and it's the responsibility of the family to do that. And in that context of the custom and clan ethics, it is the collective and the collective will, the collective customs and practices that are much above what the individual child feels. Is there an infection? Does it hurt? Could you die? All of that is irrelevant. It's about the collective's sense of honor and shame. The second constraint to my freedom as an individual was repressive governments. I was born in Somalia. My family lived, when I was a child, in Saudi Arabia, a theocracy. Then we moved to Ethiopia, and then we went to Kenya. And in each of these countries, there were governments in place that used the tools of state to suppress individual will. And sometimes they were advancing what they believed was the collective good. When we lived in Saudi Arabia, women and men were not only separated, but women were kept indoors. And if we wanted to go outside of the house, we were covered from head to toe in black clothing. And in those days, in the 70s, remember, not much air conditioning. In fact, I remember wheels of cars melting in 50 degrees centigrade. That is, tell me how many degrees in Fahrenheit. So extremely hot temperatures. And in those temperatures, if women wanted to go outside of the house, they had to have a male chaperone, and they were to be covered from head to toe. And I remember being 8 or 9 years old with my little sister. We fled from Somalia that we thought was bad enough because the Somali government had put my father in prison, killed many of his colleagues, tortured, and did everything that we here believe to be appalling that a government should not do. But going to Saudi Arabia in search of improvement, as a female, I remember with my little sister, we walked out and on the sidewalks, and there were these, what looked like black, I don't know, the front and the back was kind of the same. And my little sister and I, when one of the women took her hand out in black gloves to hold the hand of her child, we said, "Oh my God, they move. They have hands." And this is us coming from Somalia, not you coming from the United States to see what goes on in a country that uses its resources not to advance the human development of its citizens, men and women, but uses its resources to keep in place old notions of suppression, of subjugation, and the subjugation of women. When we go to Ethiopia, things are better in a way, because as a girl child, at least I don't have to be covered from head to toe, and we're separated. I do know at that point, at the age of 9, what my place is as a female, but it is not as bad as things were in Saudi Arabia. But the government of Ethiopia, the dictator who was in place then, was no less oppressive. If anybody stood up to him within Ethiopia, asked any questions about where our society is going, what is happening to the Ethiopian resources, why is the government stealing so much? The response was to take those members of opposition, to kill them, to torture them, to exile them, to lock them out. When we move to Kenya, things are, this is all by degrees, for us a little better. Because as Somali expatriates, we're not subjected to the same kind of subjugation that Kenyans are subjected to. And again, as a girl, as a little girl, I know my place. And my place is that I do not have and will never have the same rights as men will. And if you want to make life easier as a girl, as a young woman, anybody in that type of hierarchy, the thing to do is to resign to it, accept it. Why would you ask questions? Because if you ask questions, you're going to be punished. You're going to meet with hardship. And in that context, where as a young girl, I'm attracted to the education that I'm being given at that time, thanks to, yes, British imperialism and the infrastructure of schools they left behind, I am able to go to school and learn English and read and write. And reading opens up the world to you, not as a collective, but as an individual. So when I started reading about Nancy Drews, which I've mentioned, it wasn't only Nancy Drews, but it seems as if every time I talk about my reading list in secondary school, Americans are only attracted to the Nancy Drews. But of course, we also read more, I would say, in terms of, think of it as, you know, subversive literature that starts with, yes, Oliver Twist. You know, you do your Dickens, however boring that is. You do your Little Women, that's still subversive in that context. And I have my mother, who is ruling our house with a chaotic iron fist. She is a victim of circumstance. And as her children, we are the victims of a woman who is the victim of circumstance. My father left because he wanted to be, he was moved much more by his political ambitions. And in that context, my mother demands that we read only the Quran. And my identity as a Muslim girl, it is in my teenage years that it really starts to take on. Because it is as a teenager that we start to ask, what's the point of all of this? There's all this pain, there's all of this punishment. Nothing is comfortable or lovely or wonderful. Why? Why have we been put on earth? Why? And at that point, this is 1985, 1986, I'm 15, 16, 17, and I'm getting explanations that are, well, the evolutionary, biological, so, you know, you're just like a butterfly. You are born, you reproduce, you die. You know, take it on the chin, stop complaining. Or there is a purpose. You know what? You are a Muslim. You've been chosen by God, and the reason why you've been put on earth is so that you can show that you can submit to Him, And not only you submit, but that you then go and command right and forbid wrong. So I was running around trying to convert my Kenyan classmates into Islam, which didn't work that much. But in hindsight, what I remember was that Islam as a narrative explained a lot of what we were going through in a very simplistic way. It gave us a purpose. I became a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. I donned the niqab from head to toe. I went around telling young women to cover themselves and to pray 5 times a day. But it also did something else, because by being exposed to reading and writing and ideas, I was also implicitly asking questions, and sometimes explicitly. But if Allah is just, if He is compassionate, then why do I have to obey my husband without question? Then why do I have to be, as a woman, put in this position when the man can do all of those other things? I never got answers, at least answers that satisfied me. The answer was, you are asking these questions because your head has been colonized by demons and the devil. You're a devil child. And you can understand years later, when I come to the Netherlands and I'm accused of being an infidel because I ask questions, then I embrace the term infidel. When I'm told you're evil because you ask questions, then I say, then fine, I'm evil, but I do want to ask questions. And so my background, my life, my childhood, my journey from where I was born and when I was born to where I am now could not be more different from the individuals who have brought us together here and whom we admire. But what we have in common is that quest, that ceaseless quest for freedom. I will defend my father and mother, their integrity and their honor. But I will never defend the philosophy of custom and clan, of religion, and of repressive government that keeps things the way they are, that gives power to a few to oppress the many. I will never defend that. I thank you for your applause. I thank you for acknowledging me, but I want to tell you, I'm not unique in that. That spirit, that urge is universal. It is universal. You probably read about people in Bangladesh who are blogging about their individual freedoms and how they are challenged by men waving meat cleavers who attack them and kill them. Why are those bloggers risking their lives, knowing that they're risking their lives because they haven't stopped blogging? Why are they risking their lives? Why is a young man in Saudi Arabia who knows the odds against him, why on earth is he risking his life and the well-being of his wife and his children, knowing that he's going to be punished by these seemingly larger forces, the Saudi forces? Raif Badawi is a young man who was blogging about secularism and freedom, individual freedom, and the Saudi government sentenced him to 1,000 lashes, 50 of which they have, in fact, implemented. And he hasn't walked back. He hasn't apologized. They haven't been able to break his spirit. His wife is in Canada fighting for him and his freedom. But he and she know that it is worth it somehow. Maybe not for them. They are probably going to kill him. But it's his legacy. And when individuals put everything that they have in them to fight for that higher ideal meaning of freedom, human freedom. That is freedom with dignity, not comfort and complacency, not having an iPhone or having a roof over your head or having something to eat. It's something more than that. It's something bigger than that. It's something bigger than yourself. If you are able to commit to that and devote your life to that, however small it is, and each of us do that, and we understand that narrative and we refine it, and all we have to do really is propagate it. Because for all of us here, including me, we are living and enjoying the freedoms that others have fought for. I can never take it for granted because I can compare the two worlds where in one world freedom was absent and in the other world it was abundant. And to be quite honest with you, I am really not worried about where I came from, where freedom was absent, because the urge to seek it is so overwhelming. I am worried about those who inherited freedom and come from a world and are in a world where freedom is abundant, that they take it for granted, that they forget what they're about. I want to go back to Sir Anthony Fisher while I Googled him today. He understood this, and so did Hayek. And in their understanding, and Sally Pipes mentioned that, when Sir Anthony thinks, well, I should go into government, and Hayek says, no, don't. It's all about ideas and the battle of ideas. It's the way we think, the think tanks. And now we have the think tanks, and this is one of them. And it is my obligation and yours to support it in every possible way we can. But that is where we are at. The ideology that I fight, Islamic extremism, is a coherent ideology. It is based in a tradition of over 1,400 years old. Individuals who join the Islamic State believe in the caliphate. They're not just a crazy few. They believe in what they believe in, like the National Socialists believe in, like the socialists, the communists believe in. They do know, and they're clever. They're smart. They're gifted. But they use their cunning and their cleverness and their resources to advance an idea where the individual is subjugated for the sake of their utopia, Sharia law. We know that the way to fight that is by having a better idea. And we do have the better idea. We have fought totalitarian ideologies in the past. What we need is the courage, Stephen, to go back to the term courage, to remind ourselves, and remind our audiences of those truths, a coherent truth from the past, and make it attractive for people who have no freedom and for those who are going to inherit the free world. That when you are confronted with a bad idea, the best way to fight it is with a good idea. And the best way, because we don't know what a good idea is, and we don't know what a bad idea is, unless we discuss those ideas and we experiment with those ideas. And you have to be suspicious, and you have to be hostile to anybody, individual, a group, or nation that wants to ban discussion, that wants to ban the free exchange of ideas. The Organization of Islamic Conference is united to stop the free flow of ideas to discuss the merits and demerits of Islam as a political philosophy. And it's not only the Organization of Islamic Conference, which is made up of nation states, but it's also non-governmental actors and a myriad of organizations here in the United States. What we stand for, and that is a minimum, but it's a basic minimum and it's what we are about, is to say, yes, you can propagate your idea, which I do not agree with. I think Sharia law is the worst plan on earth. It violates human rights, but that is what I think. I will defend your right to propagate Sharia law, but I will not stoop. I never ever accept that you shut down debate. If pictures of the Prophet Muhammad are drawn and the response is violence, then all of us should draw pictures of the Prophet Muhammad to make the point. I think I'm going to save the rest of what I have to say. There's a little clock here that tells me I'm out of time. I'm going to save it for my discussion with Steve and later on take your questions. But thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Have a seat and right.
Thank you so much.
So, oh good, our microphones are nice and booming and loud. First of all, Ayaan, I just want to let you know that I don't think I've been to many of these dinners we've held every year, and I've never seen the audience so riveted as I did tonight. And I can tell you a quantitative measurement of how I know this. I've got one question. Normally, there's a few more, good. Have our staff come collect them. Okay, but that's many. Usually I have a stack of them, I can't get through them. I kept waiting for questions to be passed along. But so someone collect some of the cards and bring them up to me. Let me ask just a couple of questions to get us started. One is I'd like to draw you out just a little bit more about your sort of intellectual development. You know, in your first book, Infidel, you talk about your political career in Holland, and I think this is fair to say, you associated yourself with sort of the moderate social democracy of the Labour Party, and then joined the Liberal Party, which in Britain doesn't, in Europe doesn't mean liberal the way we mean it here.
Yes.
Right? Most of this audience, I think, knows that. And then you talk about Hayek and Popper and John Stuart Mill, and so I'm just curious if you could say a little bit more about when you started reading these figures and how they affected your thought and influenced your broader currents.
Well, I think the first, I became a member of the Social Democratic Party right after university, 2000, 1999, 2000, and that's pre-9/11. I came to the Netherlands in 1992. I was, of course, impressed, and I still am, by the fact that there was a society where nobody starved, nobody was homeless. So what Hayek called, basic safety net wasn't really that basic from my perspective. It was luxurious, really. So having that experience, being the student of professors who were social democrats, even though they introduced me to the works of classical liberals, the natural thing and the right thing to do was to be a member of the Social Democratic Party. And I went to work for the think tank. But at that point, the subject they asked me to look into was the integration, or rather what in the US we would call the assimilation of immigrants from the Muslim countries, Morocco, Turkey, and then the asylum seekers, that's Somalia, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, the others. Why is it that you have been here for 10 years and you're so well assimilated, and why is the rest of it not happening? And I look into that and I come up with a few conclusions, the most important of which is, well, women. If these girls would have the same opportunity that I had go to school, finish school, and just make their own choices, and the government were to protect them, I think the assimilation process would be much faster. What we now call the welfare state was really not a welfare state in the sense of offering a safety net. It became a I really have to choose my words carefully now, but people were leaving their countries of origin to come and just take and get all these entitlements. And the countries that the host country they were coming into wasn't explaining to them where all these goodies were coming from.
Yes, we have that problem too.
Yeah, you know, the whole logic between we all have to pay taxes, and that is really as a safety net, it's only if you can. That this is a concept that the average Dutch man and woman understand, and then those who don't understand are in big trouble because they're called all kinds of names. So if you are white and you're free riding on the system, there's a vocabulary of Dutch words, really degrading and demeaning words for you, but that wasn't applied to the immigrants, so nobody explained it to them. And so in a way, I think, out of a sense of good intentions, the Social Democrats were coddling the immigrants, and in doing so, they robbed them of their dignity and of their incentive.
Right.
And that is tragic. And that's not the reason why I left. The reason why I left the Social Democratic Party was because every single time I asked about these child marriages, real violence, real oppression, they would give me collective answers. It wasn't about the individual, it was about the group. We had to respect their culture. But what about this girl's life? What about this girl's future? What about this girl's career? They wouldn't talk about that. It would be the culture, the religion, some abstract concept.
Yeah, it sounds just like an American college where multiculturalism means no culture at all. Right?
It means no culture, yes,
right.
Because what is culture?
Right.
Well, it's about individual human beings.
I've got now I've got a stack of good questions. I'm going to bundle a few of these and modify them. One interesting question is what difference, if any, do you think there is between Muslims in Europe and Muslims in America? Do you see some differences? Do you think they'll persist? And a related question is, do you think we should have more Muslim immigration or part of the Syrian diaspora that's going on right now?
I don't think we should approach it that way. I think what we are seeing is we're seeing immigrants by different, so for me, when I came to the Netherlands, I didn't think of myself as belonging to this or that collective. I was an individual fleeing a very specific set of threats, a very specific set of obstacles. And I think that is how we should look at every individual who decides to come here, whether for economic reasons, for educational reasons, because they're refugees or asylum seekers. And in this community, that's what we really have to be careful about, that we don't go along in the labeling of fellow human beings as this or that. We know that there is an effort, and there has been an effort for a long time, an ideology, and the agents of that ideology want to identify people who are Muslim, to forget about all their identities and to think of themselves as a group, as Muslims. In fact, I have found a document where these ambitions are made explicit. So when I think about Muslims in America and Muslims in Europe, there are a few generalities. You know, to Europe they come, it's much closer proximity, poorer, relatively poorer people from Muslim countries come to Europe than in America. To come to America, you have to take a flight. So there are more obstacles to get here. But there's also the resettlement issue. What you want to understand is, when you come here, how does the environment called America respond to you versus how do these various European countries respond to you? If you look at people from the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, in the early years, they assimilated in the 50s, 60s. They were subjected to the same conditions as other immigrants. And they assimilated much faster than in the era of all these collectives. Now there is a Council of American Islamic Relations that are self-appointed, that say they speak for all Muslims. They don't. And our government tries to get the attention or absorb Muslims through these various organizations. So in that sense, what is happening to the United States of America and the relationship with their immigrants from these nations is going the European way instead of us pulling the Europeans towards our way.
Yeah, my opinion is, not just mine, is that America used to be a lot better at assimilating immigrants of all kinds, and it's not clear we're still good at that, and this is related to that problem. Let me ask you sort of a broader question about America. You've been here about a decade now, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the really charming passages in Infidel is mentioning your first visit to the United States, to San Diego. And you said, I don't quite remember the exact words, but it's something like, America's nothing like what I'd heard. It's
Yes.
not all fat people and dumb people and all the rest of that.
Shooting around, yeah.
Right? People are exercising and reading books. And,
Yes.
well, the point is immigrants and thoughtful foreign visitors have often had very shrewd observations on our country. Tocqueville and Chesterton are, two of the most famous. And you don't just come from Europe, but you've lived in the Arab world, part of Africa and Europe, and now here.
Yeah.
So you're a real multiculturalist in the right sense of the word. So I wonder if you could just share a few of your impressions and thought about America, both good and bad. What are strengths and weaknesses that we should worry about?
I think if I go back to that time in San Diego, I lived in the Netherlands. I was working for the most powerful think tank. I was threatened because this is in 2002. It was right after 9/11 because I took the position I took about Islam and women, and the rest of it. And an author friend, Leon de Winter, proposed that the safest place for me to go was the United States of America or Israel. And people in the Netherlands thought, no, you shouldn't go to Israel. That's ridiculous. We'll send you to America. Now, here's an anecdote. When I land in JFK on my way, because you have to land from Amsterdam, JFK, and then JFK to LAX, the Washington sniper was busy.
Oh, right.
And the idea, when you're in Europe, the idea that you have, and that this is really through the media, the prejudice against America is they're all fat, they're all angry, and they're all armed. So it cannot be a safe place to go to. And so then I actually go to Santa Monica, and it is not only safe, and people are in the Santa Monica area very thin and health conscious. But there's another prejudice that the world has about the U.S. And so the Americans are ignorant. They don't have passports. They never go anywhere. Potato couches, and they sit in front of their televisions. I
like that. It's couch potato, but that reversal works just fine.
Couch potatoes. Now, you know what? You will see a lot of ignorant people all across the world. But I have not come, in my 46 years, I have not come across people smarter than Americans. There is no Silicon Valley anywhere else but in the United States of America. Yes, it's emerging in Israel, and there are a few little places in Finland and all that. But America is based on an idea. And if you want to be a couch potato and be fat and be armed, there's a place for you.
Yeah, liberals call it Texas, but yeah.
But if you want to have the whole world connected through a search engine, there's a place for you. If you want to, Sergey Brin, which country is he from? So that's the thing. It's America that you can do these places. Tesla, Elon Musk is from South Africa. All of these people who in their own countries do not have the free environment to follow their curiosity and innovate, they come to America. Now, what is the weakness that I now see in America? And I'm sure other immigrants have seen before me, is that Americans can be dazzled by stuff that goes outside of the US, and especially in Europe. So we are dazzled by the welfare state in Denmark and in Sweden, and we're dazzled by what is happening in Germany. Really? And it's that kind of, our president, really with the best intentions in the world, wanting to turn America into Europe, giving back the bust of Winston Churchill. The fashionable idea of the day. Yes, some Americans say, and our American celebrities thinking, I'm a good actor, therefore I can tell you everything about the nuclear negotiations between Iran and the US. That's the sort of thing that I think it's exasperating, it's annoying. But it is truly different, and I have lived in this. I think you should give a tribute, and you should honor this man called Bruce Bauer, who is an American, who is gay, and he left the United States of America because he thought America was hostile to homosexuals. And he gets his partner in Norway, and he lives there, and he says, my goodness, in America they were denying me the right to marry. In Norway, they're denying me the right to live.
Yeah.
And it's once, you're an American and you go and really experience how things are outside of the US that you come back fully appreciating what you left.
Right.
Maybe Texas is not so bad.
I just saw a note from Bruce Bauer today. He's in some small town in Norway, I think 12,000 people, and they're taking 1,000 of the migrants that are coming in, just being told from the central government, you have to take them. And he's starting to think about whether he might want to come back here.
And it's true, we have a lot of political correctness in America. Maybe political correctness was founded in America because it's a heterogeneous society. But what we also have is opposition. There's always pushback, and I really hope that we continue to do that. There's CNN, but there's also Fox. There's the New York Times, but there's the Wall Street Journal. There is, you can, for now, for the moment, stop, don't applaud yet, because we've got to keep fighting. And then there's all this stuff going on in these campuses where kids are being coddled, and you have to, but there's an outrage against it. People come out and say, I don't care, I don't like this. I don't like this. And I think that is, in America, there's still a space to do that. In Europe, that is...
Right.
Yeah, it's very sad, but...
Let me press on a little further on this question of our weaknesses in a much more precise way. Several questions here about... I'll just rephrase them this way. You remind me at times of Orwell, George Orwell, who used to say, we need to call things by their proper name. Yeah. And in various places, your Bradley lecture a few months ago, elsewhere in your books, you've talked about, and something that people have mentioned in a couple of the questions here is, we have a president who says the Islamic State is not Islamic.
Yes.
How is this possible to say something so obviously idiotic, right? And so talk about that problem in any way you like.
And our president is well-intentioned, and the president before that, George W. Bush, who I admire, and I am one of the people who think, oh God, when are we going to have President George Bush come back, or another Bush? But here's the thing. I miss him, don't you? One of the things that but President George Bush called Islam a religion of peace. The Prime Minister of the UK, all over the free world, they described Islam as a religion of peace. And there's this narrative, and it's strategic, and in many ways it's tactical, that if we in the West, we portray ourselves as respecting whatever it is that their demands are, then the Islamists will not be able to sell the idea that America is at war with Islam or the West is at war with Islam. In 2001, you could say that was the experimental stage. And maybe, it might work, it might not work. But we did that consistently, all of us, and it didn't work. And so now it's time to think maybe we should call things by their real name. We should always call things by their real name. But we've been persuaded that this is the right strategy. It is not the right strategy. It is not working out. We've been told that Islam is twisted by these terrible people in a place where it doesn't belong. No, the only thing that is twisted is our logic. It is our logic where we are saying the Prophet Muhammad, who founded Islam, preached jihad and practiced it. He beheaded people. He took women as slaves, the tribes that he defeated. And then there's this very clear description. You can't twist it. You can't do anything to it. Any great publisher, Clark, you are from a writer's bureau. There's no way you could twist that. Flog the adulterer and the adulteress 100 times. Let a party of believers watch the punishment. Let no compassion move you. Tell me how you could twist that. The Quran is replete and the Hadith is replete with what you do once you conquer a people, with the women, the men, the children. Jihad against the infidels. Offensive jihad versus defensive jihad. All of this is in the Quran. There's no way of twisting it. What we're seeing is it's playing itself out in a way that people who believe in these things and who take these things literally are doing things that offend our senses, that violate human rights, and the human rights of Muslims first and foremost and all the others. There's anti-Semitism back, and it's being driven with oil money. We're seeing this before our very eyes, and we're still convincing ourselves 14 years after 9/11 that the best way to deal with this is through euphemisms. And that's not going to work. And maybe that is why the electorate go for people like Donald Trump. Because if the establishment is going to drown itself in these euphemisms, then just give me some guy who's going to talk like,
like a human being, right? Like a normal human being, right?
Or like a street. Street smart person.
Right.
Give me somebody who's going to talk like them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what are, because this question's maybe too broad. You talk about how there needs to be some kind of reformation in Islam. I mean, we did have reformations in Christianity and in Judaism. They took a long time and were very difficult.
Yes.
And in many ways, things are getting worse instead of better. I mean, there are a number of questions here about what are we to make of some of these educational efforts of radical Islam?
Yeah.
Right, to really proselytize the most radical version of it. So let me throw out a couple of different questions here, and you can grab it and go whatever way you want. Are there Islamic moderates? Is there a reform community out there that can be built upon? Mm-hmm. And then the other part would be, what should we do? I mean, we either as a country, we as individuals and organizations and people who want to do something about it.
Okay, so this is the subject of Heretic, the book that where you're coming and you may have seen. And I lay it out there. And I think, we have to deal with, first of all, the challenge of Muslim diversity. There are 1.5 billion people who say that they adhere to the religion of Islam. How do you deal with that diversity? And there I draw 3 umbrellas: Mecca Muslims, Medina Muslims, and reformers or modifiers. My description, my understanding of reform in the book, my definition of reform, is not to go back to the original text as Luther did in Christianity or advocated that we do. It is to change some of the core principles within Islam that are problematic. And then the next question is, so what are those core principles that are problematic? And I come up with 5 of them. The idea that you have to follow in this one book and one man. And a lot of people, especially theologians, will say, oh, but you can't do that. And that's where the whole twisting and the intellectual acrobatics comes in. There are things in the Quran and in Muhammad that are so explicit and so unacceptable that really the only way out is to repudiate them, to refute them, to say this is unacceptable. And now the interesting thing is that there are Muslims who are doing that, who are rejecting the idea of the caliphate, who are calling for a separation of politics from religion, who are calling for an equality of men and women before the law, and a tolerance of other religions and tolerance of other ways of life. The second thing that I think needs to change about Islam, maybe even more important than the first, is that Islam is all about a narrative of death. This life on earth is transitory. That's what you are taught if you are a Muslim. And it's not only if you are a fundamentalist or an extremist. It is every single Muslim who has to understand that to be a Muslim is to accept this life as in passing. What does that mean? It kills incentive. Why would you work hard? Why would you innovate? Why would you write? Every single desire to live life fully and contribute to this life is killed because it's not about that. It's about the afterlife. You invest in the afterlife. So if you're really a young man seeking purpose in life at the impressionable age and you're sexually driven, you want to rush to a martyrdom because that rewards you more than a career in the corporate world or in government or in health or in non-profit. So this emphasis on life after death, it has to go, it has to change. Number 3, Sharia law. Sharia law is divine law. It's stagnant, it's stayed in place, these cruel and unusual punishments, the idea that, a small group of men, the Supreme Council, are enacting God's laws, absurd. That needs to go because Sharia law takes away the rights and freedoms completely of women, of gays, of people who believe in other religions, of individual freedom. What happened to Islam's innovators? Where are they? You apply Sharia law, there's no innovation, there's no freedom. And in order to enable Sharia law in the house, at school, in the neighborhood, in the community, you have the 4th principle, which is commanding right and forbidding wrong. In other words, asking this individual to tell that individual constantly what they should be doing right and what they shouldn't be doing wrong. And then finally, jihad or holy war. That is the subject of heretic. So can Islam be reformed? Yes. Will there be something left of Islam if these 5 principles are taken out? Yes, you could still somehow, and this is one of the things I would say as I matured and I learned and deeply understood Hayek's work was, don't just throw away thousands and thousands or hundreds of years of tradition. So is there something, if you are a Muslim, that you could salvage out of Islam? Yes. The sense of community. If some people like to pray 5 times a day, some people like to practice yoga 5 times a day. Go for it. So it feels some of these needs, these spiritual needs, the fasting, all of this, Islam meets those needs. But the violence, the intolerance, that sort of the caliphate, the jihad, that we have to be, whether you are a Muslim or not a Muslim, we have to be unequivocal about saying this is wrong. This has to be rejected. It's non-negotiable.
I've mentioned this to you a couple of times and never felt like I've gotten to the bottom of it. There was a tradition, I think you could call it a tradition, or at least a strain of Islamic humanism 1,000 years ago or so, with Islamic philosophers who discovered the Greek, Aristotle and Plato before Christian Europe did. They were actually arguably hundreds of years ahead of the Christian humanism of the Renaissance.
Yes.
Today, my understanding is, and I've seen this in university book catalogs, the modern editions of those writers are banned in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, all the usual places. And So I don't know if this is Bernard Lewis's question partly, is what happened to that tradition? Why did it prove to be stillborn? And could that be worked with and brought back in any way? Should we airdrop copies of Al-Farabi in Saudi Arabia? I don't know.
Well, I think the answer to that question is why I call the book heretic. Because individuals from the early days who started to put question marks on the absolutism within the Quran would find within the community others then who identify them as heretics. And again, let's look at the great and famous Ibn Khaldun, the philosophers Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina. They are not celebrated in the Muslim world. They're celebrated in the West by us. And they did contribute a great deal. They did have, in my view, they saved the works of the Greeks and passed them on to us, and they did think about them, and there was a vibrant tradition of discussion in some of the courts of the caliphs, not all of them. But sooner or later, as these discussions took place, there would always be resistance from the clergymen who would say, you're taking this line of questioning too far.
Right.
And the next question is going to take us to unbelief, and so stop it. And that took, if you think in the history of Islam, to the closing of the gates of ijtihad. I mean, in the 21st century, unthinkable. Close the gates of logic. Who would ever say that now? But that's what happened. Now, these are not individuals who today are being celebrated in the Muslim world. They're being celebrated here. But what I see, and I want to go back again to these three categories of Muslims. The Medina Muslims. Think of the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, sometimes violent, sometimes non-violent. All the various flavors of Salafism. These are individuals and groups and nations that believe that Sharia law, the caliphate, that is the way to go. In your own home, in your neighborhood, in your community, in your society, but maybe even the whole world. They're very ambitious. Medina Muslims. They do not agree on the means to that end, but they do agree with the end. Then you have the Mecca Muslims. Mecca Muslims, they pray, they fast. Maybe they don't pray, they don't fast. It doesn't matter. They observe some of the religious duties, they don't observe. But they really do not put politics and religion together. They have their own fights, like we did when we were in Somalia, the clan fights. We just didn't bring religion into it. So if you were having a fight in Israel and you hated the Jews, maybe you just hated the Jews because you happen to hate the Jews, but you didn't hate the Jews because God told you to hate them. And that is the difference between a Mecca Muslim and a Medina Muslim. A Medina Muslim will say it is an obligation, it's a religious obligation to hate the Muslims. And a Mecca Muslim will say, I just hate them anyway, don't need even a religious clarification for that. Or a Mecca Muslim, alternatively, will be friends with his Jewish neighbors and cohabit with Jewish, Christian, and lapsed Muslims. But then there's this third group that I've now called reformers. And they want to revive that tradition of ijtihad, of rethinking and discussing and reopen those gates of ijtihad. Are they going to be successful? I don't know. But their effort is worthwhile, and it is worth supporting, and it's worth watching where they're taking things.
Well, final question, because we've sadly come to the end of our evening. Are you, this is too broad, are you an optimist or a pessimist, or are those the wrong poles, and should you maybe define for us in what ways you are a realist? Because that's what your husband Neil would say you ought to be.
Oh no, I am an optimist. He's the realist. I am an optimist, and I believe in, when you say things are going wrong, it doesn't mean that you're going to resign in the fact that things are going wrong. He wrote that book, Degeneration, and this afternoon we discussed about it. And I think the response to degeneration is to regenerate. When we are confronted with challenges, whether it's radical Islam or a revival of socialism, and maybe a mutation of what socialism was in the days of Hayek. And then when these two movements get married, I think that the response to that is to regenerate, to rethink, to fight back. It is not to push back. It is not to sit back and say, well, this is how things are happening, and we have to accept it. And quite honestly, just in terms of observation, that is why I think I feel more empowered and optimistic when I'm in America, because I can easily sit here in a room full of free generators than when I was in Europe, where I would be in a room with 21-year-olds who kind of, were ready to accept whatever happened next. And we're very passive, and are very, our laws come from Brussels, so be it. It's like, no.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Ayaan, we are not passive in our deep appreciation for you and all you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.